She caught me staring, laughed softly, and said, "Don't pretend you're not distracted." In that moment I knew this wasn't just a class anymore, it was the beginning of something I could never ignore. I still remember the way the late afternoon sunlight spilled across the classroom that day, painting long, golden stripes over the rows of empty desks. Most of the students had already packed up and rushed out, but I lingered behind, gathering my notes at a slower pace. Something about the quiet after everyone left always made me feel like the room belonged to just the two of us, me and her. She was standing at the front, flipping through a stack of papers, her black hair falling loosely around her shoulders. There was a calmness about her, a kind of poise that didn't need to be announced. I was supposed to be focusing on my notebook, but my eyes kept drifting toward her, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the faint curve of a smile playing at her lips as she read over a line. I didn't realize I'd been staring until she looked up. Her eyes caught mine, sharp at first, but then they softened. A small, amused laugh slipped out as she tilted her head. "Don't pretend you're not distracted," she said. The words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just what she said, it was the way she said it. Light, teasing, but carrying a truth I couldn't deny. My throat tightened, and for a moment, I forgot how to respond. I stammered something about being tired, about having too much on my mind, but we both knew that wasn't it. Her laughter lingered in the air, warm and unguarded. It wasn't the polished laugh of a teacher keeping up appearances in front of a full class. It was real, unfiltered, like I had caught her off balance too. I could feel the heat rise in my face as I gripped the edge of my desk a little tighter, grounding myself against the smooth, cool surface. My palms felt warm, and my chest carried this strange, steady thrum, like my heart had shifted gears without asking permission. She went back to her papers, humming quietly, but I couldn't stop replaying that moment. The sound of her laugh, the way her eyes had lingered just a little longer than necessary, as if she knew more about me than I had admitted, even to myself. The rest of the classroom felt hushed, like the world outside had muted itself. The faint smell of chalk dust mixed with her perfume, subtle, elegant, and impossible to ignore. It was a small moment, but in my mind, it stretched on, filling every corner of the room. And that's when it struck me, this wasn't just a routine after-class silence. This was the first spark of something I couldn't quite name yet, something that would keep me coming back, again and again, long after everyone else had left. It started happening more often after that day. I would linger when everyone else packed up, offering small excuses to stay behind, an extra question about the assignment, a comment about the lecture. At first I told myself it was just curiosity, but deep down, I knew the truth. I wanted those extra moments with her, when the classroom was no longer a stage, but just a quiet place where two people could breathe. She never seemed surprised when I stayed. In fact, she welcomed it. Sometimes she would ask me to help gather papers or stack the books she kept in the corner. It was ordinary work, but somehow, it didn't feel ordinary at all. Every small task became a chance to be close to her, to notice the details no one else paid attention to, the faint freckle just beneath her jaw, the way her fingers moved with a mix of grace and efficiency, the soft line of concentration that appeared between her brows when she sorted through essays. One afternoon, I reached for a pile of papers at the same time she did. Our hands brushed, just briefly, skin against skin. It was nothing, accidental, harmless, yet it left a warmth that spread quickly through my chest. She didn't comment on it, only gave a faint, knowing smile as she let me take the stack from her. That smile carried more weight than words ever could. The classroom felt different during those moments. Without the chatter of other students, the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed louder, but in a way that wrapped us into a private cocoon. Even the scratch of her pen across the page felt intimate, like the sound belonged to just us. Our conversations began to drift too. What started as questions about the syllabus shifted into more personal territory. She told me she liked to read late into the night, that she had a soft spot for quiet cafes where no one recognized her. I shared stories about my part-time job, my fumbling attempts at writing, even the restless dreams I carried about the future. She listened in a way that felt different from anyone else, not just politely, but attentively, as though my words mattered. Sometimes she would laugh at something I said, a laugh so unrestrained it made her seem years younger, like she was forgetting for a moment the role she was supposed to play. And every time she laughed, I found myself wanting to be the reason it happened again. There was nothing dramatic in those afternoons. No declarations, no sudden confessions. Just papers exchanged between our hands, soft conversations that stretched longer than they needed to, and glances that lingered a second too long. But in those small, ordinary acts, something extraordinary was quietly taking root. I didn't call it attraction yet. I didn't even dare give it a name. But I knew one thing for certain. I wanted to stay in that classroom after everyone else had gone, as long as she would let me. One evening, I walked into the classroom expecting the usual hum of students packing up, but instead, I found the room already empty. The overhead lights glowed softly, throwing pale reflections across the windows, and she was sitting alone at her desk. She didn't notice me at first. Her shoulders were slightly hunched, her hand propped against her temple as she stared down at a stack of papers. There was no trace of the usual calm, no teasing smile, only weariness, like the weight of the day had finally settled on her. I hesitated at the doorway, unsure if I should interrupt. Something about seeing her like that, vulnerable, unguarded, felt almost too personal, as if I was intruding on a side of her the world rarely saw. But before I could step back, she lifted her head and caught my eyes. "You're still here," she said, her voice softer than usual, touched with surprise. "Yeah," I admitted, gripping my notebook tighter than I needed to. "I just wanted to ask about the assignment." It was a flimsy excuse, and we both knew it. She smiled faintly, but it was different this time, not polished, not for show. "The assignment can wait," she murmured, pushing the papers aside. "Honestly, I think I just needed a moment to breathe." I walked closer, the scrape of my shoes echoing in the quiet. Pulling a chair beside her desk, I sat down slowly, as if giving her the chance to send me away. But she didn't. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, the fabric of her blouse creasing as she exhaled deeply. "Teaching isn't always what people imagine," she said after a pause. "Everyone thinks it's about control, about always having the answers. But some days—" She trailed off, her eyes drifting to the darkened windows, reflecting her silhouette. "Some days it feels lonely." Her words startled me. I had never thought of her as lonely. She seemed so composed, so certain. But hearing it from her own lips made her feel suddenly human in a way I hadn't expected. I shifted closer, resting my forearms on the desk. "You don't have to carry all of it alone," I said quietly. I didn't know where the words came from, only that they felt true. She turned her head toward me then, and in her gaze I saw something unspoken, gratitude, maybe even relief. A faint shine lingered in her eyes, though she blinked it away quickly. "You're a good listener," she whispered, as though the admission cost her something. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was gentle, like the kind that settles after rain. For the first time, I wasn't just looking at her as my teacher. I was seeing her as a woman, strong, yes, but also carrying a softness she rarely let slip. That night, as I left the classroom, I carried her words with me. The image of her sitting there, shoulders relaxed in the glow of the overhead light, was etched into my mind. And deep inside, I knew this was no longer just about after-class conversations. This was something far more fragile, far more dangerous, and far more real. The first time we stepped outside the classroom together, it felt strangely different, as if we had crossed some invisible line. Inside, the walls and rows of desks offered us cover, a private world disguised as routine. But beyond those doors, the air felt charged, unfamiliar. It happened almost by accident. She was gathering her things at the end of the evening, her arms full of heavy books and papers. I offered to carry them, half out of politeness, half because I wanted just a little more time with her. She hesitated for a second, maybe weighing whether it was appropriate, and then gave a small, tired smile. "All right," she said softly, handing me the stack. The weight surprised me, the books pressed against my chest, warm from being in her hands. We walked out side by side, the echo of our footsteps following us down the hallway. I couldn't help but notice how different she seemed outside the classroom's strict lines. The authority in her walk was still there, but it was softened, like she was letting herself breathe more freely. When we pushed through the doors, the cool evening air rushed against my face, carrying the scent of damp leaves and faint exhaust from the street. The campus was almost empty, lit by scattered pools of light from lampposts. I shifted the books in my arms, and she glanced at me, her hair catching in the breeze. "Careful," she teased gently. "If you drop those, I'll never forgive you." I laughed, but her tone wasn't sharp. It was playful, easy, the kind of remark two friends might share. That difference struck me. I wasn't just her student walking her books to her car. For a few steps, it felt like I was simply a man walking beside a woman. We reached her car, a silver sedan parked under the dim glow of a flickering light. I set the books gently in the trunk, the metallic click of it closing sounding louder than I expected. When I turned back, she was standing closer than I realized, her arms folded, watching me with a look I couldn't quite read. There was a pause. Neither of us moved to leave right away. The world around us was quiet, the night air still. She brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, her fingers delicate, almost hesitant, and then gave me a smile, softer than any I had seen from her before. "Thank you," she said, and her voice carried something more than gratitude. Something unspoken. I nodded, unsure if I trusted my own voice. My hands still felt the ghost of warmth from the books, as though they had carried more than just paper and ink. As we finally parted, walking in opposite directions, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had shared something subtle yet undeniable. It was a small moment, almost ordinary, a walk to her car, a smile beneath a lamppost, but it carried the weight of a secret the night seemed determined to keep. It was late, later than either of us had planned to stay. The classroom had long since emptied, and the world outside the windows had gone dark, broken only by the yellow halo of street lamps glowing in the distance. She had offered to stay behind to help me with a difficult section of the material, and I agreed far too quickly, maybe for the work, but mostly for the excuse. We sat side by side at one of the long desks near the front. Our voices were hushed without meaning to be, as though the silence of the empty room demanded we treat it gently. She leaned over to glance at my notes, her shoulder brushing lightly against mine. It was such a small touch, but it sent a current through me, sharp and alive. "Your handwriting," she teased softly, tilting her head. "It's a little dramatic, don't you think?" I laughed nervously, trying to keep my focus on the page, but my chest was tight. The truth was, I could barely concentrate. Every time she leaned closer, every time her hair brushed my sleeve, the world narrowed down to her, her scent, her warmth, the way her voice seemed to soften when she spoke just to me. At one point, our knees touched under the desk. It was the kind of accidental contact that should have been ignored, brushed away with a quick adjustment. But neither of us moved. The pressure of her knee against mine was light, almost hesitant, yet it anchored me in place. I could feel my pulse quicken, each beat echoing in my throat. The silence stretched. My pencil stilled on the page. I opened my mouth, and the words almost tumbled out. The admission that she was the distraction, that I thought of her far more than I should, that I didn't want these evenings to end. But then she looked at me. Not sharply, not warning me off, but with an expression I couldn't decipher. Her eyes held mine for just a second too long, and then she smiled faintly, breaking the tension with a soft laugh. "You're very serious tonight," she said, her tone deliberately light. "Are you sure this is about the assignment?" The breath I'd been holding slipped out in a shaky laugh of my own. I shook my head, trying to mask the truth, but the weight of it pressed heavy on my chest. She had noticed. She always noticed. We went back to the notes, or at least pretended to, though either of us could quite bring ourselves to fill the silence with meaningless explanations. The air between us was charged, thick with everything unsaid. That night, when we finally packed up, I walked away with the sense that we had both come dangerously close to acknowledging something we weren't ready to name. The almost confession hung between us like an invisible thread, fragile, undeniable, and waiting for the moment it would finally break free. It was late again, one of those evenings when the hallways felt endless and hollow, the kind of quiet that pressed into your ears until even the smallest sound seemed magnified. We had finished another long stretch of work, though truthfully, either of us had been all that focused. My notebook was filled with half-finished lines, her red pen resting idle on the desk. When it was finally time to leave, she walked me to the door. It wasn't something she needed to do, but she did it anyway, as though stretching out the moment mattered to her as much as it did to me. The fluorescent light in the hallway flickered faintly, casting soft shadows across her face. She stopped just short of the doorway, turning to me with that small smile I had come to know so well. But this time, there was something different in it, less guarded, less polished, as though she had stopped pretending. Her eyes lingered on me, and then she laughed quietly, the sound barely more than a breath. "Don't pretend you're not distracted," she said. The words were the same as before, but the tone was different. Not playful, not teasing. Softer. More deliberate. Like she was admitting something of her own in the same breath. I felt my pulse in my throat, heavy and insistent. For a second, I considered denying it again, the way I had before, hiding behind nervous laughter, letting her words dissolve into the silence. But I couldn't. Not this time. "You're right," I said, my voice low, unsteady. "I am distracted." "By you?" The air between us seemed to thicken, the kind of silence that says everything words can't. She didn't laugh this time. Her smile faltered, though not in rejection. Her eyes searched mine, as if weighing the truth of what she had just heard against the danger of letting it matter. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, her hand brushed against my sleeve. It was the lightest touch, a glancing trail of her fingers, but it carried more weight than any embrace. The warmth of it spread through me, grounding and electric all at once. She didn't pull away immediately. She lingered, her fingers resting just long enough to make it clear that she wasn't pretending anymore either. "You shouldn't say things like that," she whispered, though her voice lacked conviction. "Maybe not," I admitted. "But it's the truth." For a moment I thought she might step closer. The faint glow of the hallway light softened the lines of her face, catching in her hair. She looked at me as though caught between reason and feeling, between the role she was supposed to play and the connection she no longer wanted to deny. But instead of moving, she let her hand slip away, folding her arms as though she needed to protect herself from her own impulses. Still, the look in her eyes said enough, that she had felt it too, and that this line we were dancing on was growing thinner with every passing day. When I finally stepped into the hallway, my chest still carried the imprint of her touch. The words hung between us, fragile but undeniable. And though either of us had taken the final step, we both knew, the truth was out now, and there was no turning back. The night air was cool as it drifted through the open doorway, carrying the faint scent of rain on the wind. We stood there, either of us quite ready to leave, caught in the kind of pause that stretches on until it becomes its own language. She had pulled her hand back a few moments earlier, but the memory of her touch still lingered on my sleeve like a warmth that refused to fade. Her eyes held mine, steady yet uncertain. For once, there was no teasing in her smile, no shield of professionalism between us. She looked like a woman caught between reason and longing, and for the first time, she let me see that hesitation fully. "I shouldn't," she began, then stopped. The words dissolved, unfinished, as though saying them aloud would make them too real. She exhaled slowly and lowered her gaze, her fingers tightening around the strap of her bag. I stepped just close enough for her to notice, but not close enough to push. "You don't have to explain," I said quietly. "I understand." She lifted her head then, searching my face. Maybe she was looking for doubt, or some trace of immaturity, something to remind her of the line she kept trying to draw between us. But whatever she searched for, she didn't seem to find it. Instead, after a long silence, she reached out again. This time not by accident, not in passing. Her hand found mine, her fingers curling gently over my knuckles. The touch was feather-light, but steady, carrying with it an honesty words could never hold. The world seemed to still around us. I could hear the soft rustle of leaves outside, the hum of the building's old heating system, even the faint rhythm of her breathing. But above all, I felt the quiet weight of her hand on mine, grounding me, binding us to this fragile moment of truth. "You're too young to understand what this could mean," she whispered, though her voice wavered, betraying her own emotions. "Maybe," I admitted. "But I know how I feel. And I know it's real." Her lips parted as if to argue, but no words came. Instead, her expression softened, the lines of conflict easing into something more vulnerable, something that looked a lot like hope. She gave a small shake of her head, almost smiling. "You don't make this easy," she murmured. "Neither do you," I said, and we both laughed softly, the sound carrying like a secret through the empty hallway. When she finally let go of my hand, it wasn't abrupt. She lingered, her fingertips trailing over mine before slipping away, as though leaving behind a promise instead of a farewell. We walked out together, the night cool against our skin. There were no declarations, no reckless decisions. Just two people who had finally stopped pretending, choosing instead to carry this quiet closeness into whatever came next. And as we parted ways under the faint glow of the street lamps, our eyes lingered one last time. Not as teacher and student. Not as roles bound by rules. But simply as two souls who had found something rare, and decided, gently, to hold on.